Every time I go out to visit my family in Arizona, I try to see a little bit more of the West. There's a great excitement in discovering new places. And one of the most beautiful places I visited on my last trip was the great Rocky Mountains in Colorado. Those majestic peaks are unbelievable. They're great works of God, much greater than any tower that we could build. Well, I was with my sister, and we drove up and up and up a winding road into the mountains. The peaks were still covered with snow, until we finally got to the very top of the ridge at about 11,000 feet. And there was a tunnel cut right through the top of the mountain. And in the tunnel, there was a big sign that read, "You are now crossing the Continental Divide." Well, the Continental Divide, of course, is that line that runs right along the top of the Rocky Mountains and divides the whole continent of North America into two. On one side of the divide, all of the water, the melting snow and rain, flows through rivers ultimately to the Atlantic Ocean and the Gulf of Mexico. But on the other side of the divide, all of the water flows ultimately to the Pacific Ocean. Well, sure enough, as soon as we got through that tunnel and went over the divide, everything changed. And we began to go down and down and down into the plain on the western side of the mountains. I am sure that the apostles must have felt like they were crossing some great divide when they first experienced the Holy Spirit on Pentecost. In some ways, the day of Pentecost is a great dividing day in history. Everything that happens after that day is much different than what happens before it. 50 days after the resurrection, after Easter, the apostles are gathered, and they experience the transformation of the Holy Spirit. It transforms them from being these scared fishermen who just a few weeks before had all abandoned Jesus on the cross and who were now huddled and hiding in a room so they wouldn't be arrested. It transforms them into those great witnesses to Jesus that we all know, ready to speak to great crowds, ready to go out and face great dangers to bring the good news of Jesus to all of the nations. Imagine the excitement of those apostles when they discover for the very first time the power of the Holy Spirit. Imagine their excitement when they discover that when they tell others about Jesus and they, in faith, receive baptism, that they too receive the Holy Spirit and more lives are transformed. Pentecost changes everything. Before Pentecost, the world was divided. You know, before I say that, it's wonderful to discover new things. It's so exciting. There was a great explorer, a Norwegian explorer named Roald Amundsen, and he was the first person to discover the South Pole in Antarctica. And he was also the first person to ever discover the magnetic North Pole in the Arctic. And on his trip to the Arctic, he brought a homing pigeon with him. And when he got to the North Pole, to the top of the world, he opened up the cage, and the bird flew free. Imagine the excitement of Roald's wife back in Norway when a few days later she looked up to the sky and she saw that bird circling overhead, coming down to where she was. No doubt she would have exclaimed, "He's alive! My husband, he's still alive. He made it to the North Pole." Well, that's what happens to the apostles. They are so excited when they see the Holy Spirit descending upon them. That same Holy Spirit who descended upon Jesus in the form of a dove at his baptism now descends upon them in the form of a mighty wind and tongues of fire. It changes everything. Before Pentecost, the world was divided. People were as divided from each other spiritually as Roald Amundsen and his wife were divided geographically. As the North Pole is far away from the South Pole, or the Atlantic from the Pacific. And the book of Genesis tells us how the human race came to be so divided. Before, in the beginning of history, when everyone still spoke one language on the earth, humanity united against God. And they tried to build a huge tower in Babel, a tower that would be bigger than any mountain, that would stretch to the very heavens, so they could climb up that tower and take for themselves something of the power of God, so they could gain a certain equality with God. But that tower turned out to be about as sturdy as the tower of blocks that you get when you play the game Jenga. Have you ever played that game? You take a block out and the whole tower comes crashing down. Well, sure enough, the Tower of Babel came crashing down long before it ever reached the heavens. And God came and he confused the languages of the people. Before that, everyone spoke one language. But now, brothers and sisters and friends could no longer understand each other. They were speaking different languages. So that never again could humanity unite in rebellion and pride. Now, we still see the effects of Babel in our world today. We see the results of the wars and conflicts that cause untold misery, the racial and religious prejudices that divide the human family. We see the political polarization that causes people to hate rather than simply disagree with their political opponents. Our world is divided in so many ways, north and south, east and west, rich and poor, Republican and Democrat, Team Cap and Team Iron Man. And in many ways, all of those divisions are getting worse. That's why Pentecost is needed. Pentecost makes the difference. Pentecost undoes the effects of Babel. If at Babel everyone was speaking one language and then suddenly they couldn't understand each other, at Pentecost the opposite happens. There everyone's speaking all these different languages and suddenly they can all understand the apostles in their own native tongue. They all hear the apostles, whether they're Parthians or Medes or Elamites or from Mesopotamia or Arabia or any nation, they all speak one language again. Out of the multiplicity of languages, the Holy Spirit creates the church, the great unity of humanity, this great edifice that reaches to the heavens, based no longer on the pride of Babel, but on the gift of God. And it's the mission of the church to reunite humanity again and to undo the effects of Babel. That's why you can go to any country on earth and go to a Catholic church, and no matter what language that Mass is being celebrated in, you can feel right at home, because there's a unity there in the Spirit that transcends our divisions. Today, we can pray for a personal Pentecost. We can open up our hearts and ask the Holy Spirit to come and transform our lives just as he transformed the lives of the apostles. Such a personal Pentecost can be a dividing line in our life. When we accept consciously for the first time the gift of the Holy Spirit that we received at baptism and confirmation, when we say, yes, I believe that, I want that, Holy Spirit, I ask you to come into my life, I ask you to transform me. When we do that in faith, that can become a dividing line. I remember my life before I knew the Holy Spirit in that way. When I was trying to build up my own life in my pride, block by block, like a shaky tower. And then I think about what my life is like now. built solidly on a rock, more solid than the Rocky Mountains. And it was like the Holy Spirit came right through the middle of my life and created a great continental divide. My life after that day is much different than my life before it. That's the power of the Holy Spirit. That's the power of Pentecost. That's the power that we can come to discover for ourselves.